As part of my business model, I use something called a subscription service to give people a peek at books that haven't even come out yet. Originally, I did this on Patreon, which is a subscription service where creators can create content and release it to paid subscribers. But I made the change to go to a site called Ream Stories. And I want to talk a little bit about why I made that change and how I feel about it after a few months. It's recently come to my attention that I have been messing up my intro. So I'm going to get it right this time. If you're new to my channel, welcome back. Wait, no, that's definitely what I said before. If you're new to my channel, welcome for the first time. And if you've been here before, welcome back. My name is Seth. I'm a full-time fantasy author. I like making YouTube videos about being a writer and about selling books, things like that. In truth, I was very hesitant to make the change. I had a solid subscription with a significant number of subscribers, actually, over on Patreon. And moving to Ream Stories just felt difficult. It felt risky. It felt like a risk that maybe I didn't need to take. But after talking with the team at Ream and also just thinking about where subscriptions fit into my particular model, I decided to take the plunge. And now I want to report on how it went, the good and the bad. So buckle up, because there's a lot here. First, I think it's important to give a bit of a caveat. See, we often think of Ream Stories and Patreon as apples to apples, but in reality, they're not. One is a platform that is entirely focused on authors, that's Ream Stories, and the other is generically focused on creators, that's Patreon. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that they really are sort of different experiences. If you're an author, then Ream Stories is being built for you. If you're a musician or an artist, then Patreon just could be a better bet. So take all of the pros and cons that I'm giving you in that lens, understanding that I'm talking specifically about being an author. Now let's start with which platform is easier to use, because that was actually one of my biggest reasons for thinking about making a change. Last year, I was actually seriously considering shutting my Patreon down altogether because any subscription platform requires management, and I just didn't have time to put in the amount of work required to keep my Patreon running. One of the big draws for Ream Stories was that it promised to be easier to manage. And after a few months of using it, I can report that it has been a lot easier to manage. The biggest thing is having tools that are specifically built around my books. Again, Patreon is built for creators, and so the post system is a little bit generic because they have to accommodate a huge selection of kinds of posts from a huge selection of kinds of creators. Ream Stories is entirely focused on authors, and so it just is way easier to use. Honestly, the biggest feature for me is the ability to batch upload, to take a doc and throw it into the site and have it automatically break down into chapters. Now that fits with my workflow, particularly because I use Google Docs, but that ability to upload an entire manuscript and have it broken down into chapters is huge. And then the second really important feature that has made my life way easier is that the automation tools for posting on Ream Stories are just way better, like miles better. You can schedule posts on Patreon, which when that feature came out was fantastic. On Ream Stories, though, you can just tell it, hey, I want you to post on these dates or on these days moving forward on a rolling basis. So you might say, I want to post every Monday through Friday, one chapter at 12 o'clock. And then you can just queue your story and you don't have to assign specific times, which means that if you want to add an extra chapter in, or you want to bump something around, you want to delay a chapter, you want to post a chapter early, that's fine. You can just do that. And then it will automatically adjust all of the future dates, and you don't have to do that yourself, saving a just tremendous amount of work. It also becomes a lot harder to forget to post, which is what I've done so many times on Patreon, forgetting that a new chapter needs to be scheduled so that it can come out at the right time. The book management tools are just really good, and they're only getting better. I've already been noticing improvements even in the few weeks that I have been using Ream Stories. But what about data? Data is really important to me because it's how I judge whether or not I'm on the right track. I like to have as much data as possible, and this is one area where Ream Stories just falls short. And I understand why. They haven't been around as long as Patreon. Their developer team is smaller. They're prioritizing things that are more customer facing because that's more important to the life of Ream Stories. But it would be nice to have a little bit more data about my members, a little bit more data about people who are supporting me, a little bit more data about what my churn rate is. I can find that information out, but it takes a lot of digging, and it requires me to compile reports myself from multiple sources, from Ream and from Stripe, who's the payment processor. So from a data point of view, Patreon is still ahead. Will they always be ahead? I don't think so. In fact, I think that given the way the Ream Stories development team works, we're actually going to see better data in the next year or two coming out of Ream than we do out of Patreon. Because again, Patreon is for sort of a generic creator, and so they're not giving information that is specifically useful for authors. Things like read-through rates, which wouldn't be that hard to calculate and would be just unbelievably immensely useful for someone like me, are never going to come on Patreon. That's just not going to happen. But on Ream Stories, there's a very real chance that we'll get that kind of thing. Which actually leads me to one of the main reasons that I've just been incredibly impressed with Ream Stories. Because their focus is narrower, I've seen developments happening in real time. Quality of life features for me, quality of life features for my audience. A really great example of that is that after I had moved to Ream Stories, we were talking about how I felt about the site, and I just happened to casually mention that, hey, it's sort of annoying that when I post in a Google Doc, there are extra spaces between the lines, and I have to manually go in and delete them. It's honestly not a huge deal. I had to do it on Patreon as well. I've had to do it on all sorts of sites that I've posted to, and it's just sort of part of my routine. Paste the chapter in, eliminate the spaces. Again, not a huge deal. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I jumped on to post my chapters, and lo and behold, there were no spaces to delete. They had taken my feedback seriously and made a change. So now I just have to post the chapters in directly, and they're already formatted. Something like that is so small, but so important in showing their attention to detail and how focused they are on making this the best author platform out there. And it's not just with small things like that. I've seen big site-wide changes in the last couple of months that have drastically improved the website experience for me and for my users. The responsiveness from the Ream development team is just phenomenal. And then you contrast that with Patreon, who in the 5 to 6 years that I used them produced 0 quality of life updates that actually helped authors. Instead, every single update seemed to just make it harder to use the website. I don't doubt that Patreon's development team is actively trying to improve their website, but their ability to listen to users and produce changes that benefit the community just is lacking. I don't know if it's a failure of communication. I don't know if it's a failure of focus. I'm just not sure what it is. But a lot of the features that they came out with, a lot of the big sort of quality of life improvements that they touted just weren't actually quality of life improvements. So to come to Ream Stories and see things changing for the better in real time is just an astounding experience. But all of that stuff is stuff that makes my life easier, and it doesn't necessarily affect the bottom line. And one of the big questions that I often hear is, how are adoption rates? Is it easier to get somebody to sign up for Patreon or for Ream Stories? And the answer to that is I genuinely don't know. I don't have enough data yet. I will say that I shed almost half of my subscribers moving from Patreon to Ream Stories, which I'm not super excited about. At the same time, I'm actually making just as much on Ream Stories as I was on Patreon. And so I don't know how that math works out. I'm assuming it's because a significant number of people who did move over ended up upgrading, moving to a higher tier. Again, the problem is that there just aren't enough analytics that are available to me for me to understand why that happened or what exactly is going on. I haven't noticed any issue with people saying, hey, I'd love to support you on Patreon. I don't want to sign up for Ream Stories. There have been a couple of people who have said, hey, I don't think I'm going to move my subscription over. But there have been plenty of other people who have joined since I moved my subscription. So anecdotally, I just don't think that there's much of a difference between the two sites in terms of adoption rate. Overall, though, how happy am I with my move? I should have done it sooner, honestly. That's my big takeaway. I let my fear of the unknown and fear of what might happen delay me for months. And I really should have just moved sooner. Ream Stories has been a fantastically better experience, and I've been using the time and the mental energy that I've reclaimed to write more, which is always my goal. So I hope this is a helpful breakdown. And actually, I wanted to share something else. This is the difference for me. This is the difference between Patreon and Ream Stories. I remember early in my days at Patreon, I got a card from them. I don't think they send them out anymore. Again, this was early days. Patreon was only a couple of years old. And they sent me this card that was pretty much like, hey, so glad you're on Patreon. Thank you. And here's a new program that you should sign up for that's going to cost you more money. It had something to do with physical merch. And I remember thinking, oh, interesting. I hadn't expected a platform to send me a physical thing. That's kind of interesting. And then, lo and behold, I get a package in the mail from Ream Stories. Mind you, I've only been on here for a couple of months, but I've had the fortune of passing 100 subscribers on my Ream Stories account. And so that makes me a Ruby tiered author. And they sent me a coin. They sent me a coin. They sent me a certificate. They sent me a really nice note. This is different. When I was on Patreon, I genuinely felt like I was just a piece of the machine sort of churning out content. And there was always a faint sense of frustration. I remember so many times asking for community building tools that would help me engage with other authors and do collaborations and things like that. Patreon just didn't seem to care. Every time that anybody talked to them, they were like, we hear you, and then radio silence. Never bring the subject up again. Ream is genuinely different. They seem to really want to build an author community on their site. And things like this, things like a cool award coin, are a fantastic first step. But on top of that, they're building out collaboration tools so that I can collaborate with other authors, so that I can help other people and be helped by them. And to me, that's exactly where I want to plant my feet, in communities. Because when we support each other, it makes everything so much easier. And that's the thing about Ream Stories that has impressed me the most. It's clear that they're taking a different path than Patreon did. And I'm excited to see where this road leads. But I do have a question before you go. This is something I've been wondering about for a while. What would make you sign up to a subscription service for books? Specifically for my books. Would you sign up if all you were getting was a lot of content from books that haven't been released yet? Would you be interested in physical books? Gathering information like this helps me make my subscription platform better, which is ultimately what I'm trying to do. Create a better user experience for my readers.